Blender. If you clicked on this video, chances are you know about this 3D modeling / 3D animation software. I first started using Blender when I decided to mod a group of characters into Bomb Rush Cyberfunk. Oh my gosh, I always pronounce that so wrong. Back in 2023. This was a very brief introduction to the software because the modding method didn't really require oh my gosh, bro, I'm cooked. Oh my gosh, bro. This was a very brief introduction to the software because the modding method didn't really require much Blender knowledge, so I didn't dive too deep into the software. Until 2024, when I wanted to get into making 3D animations. So I picked up Blender again and learned more about the software. Shout out to Motakakura. After that, I was like, you know what? Let me try to start making models with my OCs. And now here we are, making 3D models in Blender for the first time. In this video, I'll be going through my process of making these models and briefly explaining the different aspects of 3D modeling. This video isn't a big tutorial, but it's more of a video that simplifies, or at least tries to simplify, this experience and explains my feelings throughout. With that being said, let's start with... So the first part of the 3D modeling process is, well, the modeling part. Now some people do start with making a turnaround sheet of the character or thing they want to make and then just use that as a guideline, but I was kind of just winging it and basing my models off the style of Krasune, I hope I'm saying that right, Academy's low poly models because I like the proportions and the art style they use. They have a whole playlist explaining the different aspects of 3D modeling in more depth, so if this video gets you interested, then you should watch the videos in the playlist. All the videos are a decent length and they get right to the point. The modeling process is just adding different shapes called meshes to your scene and shaping them to look like the thing you want them to be. In Blender, you have an editing mode where you can move different vertices, which are the names of the points on the mesh, the edges, and the faces. I was mostly only moving the vertices during my modeling process, but the other options came in handy for certain situations. In editing mode, there are several tools you can use to help you as well, but the only tools I used were the loop cut and the knife tools. The loop cut tool will cut around the mesh like a loop, and the knife tool allows you to add vertex points and connect them to other vertices to make new edges. The edges are very important when we get to the rigging, because for something like the elbow joint, this line will be where it moves. Oh, I forgot to mention, I'd recommend only modeling one side of your model and then mirroring it by applying a mirror effect or modifier, as it's called in Blender, to your mesh. If you're making something like a human, it makes the process so much easier since everything on the model will be symmetrical, so you won't have to make things like the arms twice. Modeling was definitely the funnest part for me because it was the least stressful. This was because in the next steps, I had to move back and forth between two modes in Blender or to an outside application. So just staying in one place while getting the general look for the characters was really nice. No, never. You can't. Where's Mark Debbie? Where's UV mapping is actually very simple once you get an understanding of it. Basically, all you're doing when UV mapping is taking the faces of your model and putting them on an image with your textures so that the faces project certain parts of the texture onto certain parts of your model. Now originally with the Scythe plush model I made on Blockbench, when I got to the UV mapping section, I was so scared because I didn't know anything about no UVs, UV mapping, none of that bruh. When people talked about making models, I always heard about the modeling, textures, and the rigging, but not once did I hear about UV mapping. So with the Scythe plush model, I did a portion of the UV mapping steps because I projected the faces of the model onto an empty PNG image, but I didn't make separate textures for it. Instead, I drew directly on the model, which was easy because there were no details that I needed to put besides the stitches. With my two recent models though, this portion took me days because I was making the textures at the same time as I was projecting the individual faces of the model onto the texture image. Then having to go back and forward, making small tweaks to certain parts of the images, then finding out it looks bad, and then going right back to Photoshop. It was a whole process because while the models look nice, the texture images look a little crazy. But that's okay because the final product is all that matters. Also, remember how earlier I was talking about adding the mirror modifier to the mesh? Well, if you apply that, then it'll also apply to the UVs, which helps a lot. Although if you don't want one side to be the same as the other, you'll have to click on the mesh and go back to the modifiers tab and click on the mirror tab, then press Ctrl A to apply. Then you can edit one side without it showing up on the other side.
Destroy everything in your path! Make them see invincible! Make them fear invincible! Make them hate!
In basic terms, rigging is when you take the model you crafted and adding a skeleton to it so that your model can become posable. Without the skeleton, your model would just sit there and do nothing. It's like how if you as a person had no skeleton, you wouldn't be able to move your limbs. You'd just be a blob of meat. Dang, I was supposed to write more for this explanation part, but that's really it. It's that simple. Honestly, at the beginning, I thought rigging would have been the hardest part of this whole process, but it was really easy thanks to the Blender add-on Rigify. This add-on allows you to add a new complete meta rig with a skeleton bone group, in which you'll have to line up the bones to the correct parts of your model from all angles. Select the skeleton, hit generate rig, then select all the meshes and the rig, press Ctrl P and add automatic weights, and boom, your model is now rigged. In this process, I still had to learn how to add bones to the model without Rigify, because things like the hair and accessories will not be rigged with Rigify. So you'll have to go back in and rig those yourself. Also, I had to rig the face and mouth so I could switch between the different faces and mouths that I made in Photoshop for my characters. There's a video in the playlist that I mentioned earlier that has a walkthrough for this. It'll introduce you to the shading tab in Blender, but don't worry, as long as you follow the tutorial, it'll be so easy. Although, these aren't the only things included in the rigging process.
You're not listening! This isn't about me! This isn't about the millions of people Invincible count! Or something he said. I forgot what the said. Something like that.
Why did you make the noise that time? You just let it rock, buddy.
Oh my gosh, bruh. Weight painting is... Dang, voice crack. Weight painting is something else. So primarily, weight painting is all about selecting a part of your model and going to the bone that you want that part of your model to be affected by, and either painting it on a scale of red to blue, with red meaning that the bone has full control over that part of the model, and blue meaning that that bone has no control over that part of the model. This part of the process I found very annoying, but I believe that was because of the way I modeled my, well, models, especially with the arms and torso, since those were the body parts that gave me the most trouble. So the lack of edges was probably the reason, but I'm not too sure on that. Since you added automatic weights to your model, sometimes the weight of one bone would be applied to multiple meshes instead of the one mesh that you wanted to be affected by, meaning that one bone will control multiple parts of the model that it wasn't supposed to. So going into the pose mode to see what moves with what, then switching back to the weight painting mode to adjust the weights of the meshes was mostly what this process was. Luckily for the arms and legs, I only had to weight paint on one side and it would just reflect on the other side thanks to the mirror modifier. So that was pretty useful. And with that being said, this is the end of the video. Even though I'm still new to 3D modeling, I hope this was a good video explaining the different aspects of it in a way that's simpler, or at least it was simpler in my eyes. This was a very fun experience, and I'm really glad that I decided to dive into 3D modeling on Blender. I can now use these models to make animations and renders of my OCs, which is really cool. Like I said earlier, I highly recommend watching the low poly character modeling playlist that Craftsuni Academy made if you want to start 3D modeling. It's so good. The link will be in the description down below, so check it out when you have the time. This process will have its moments where things don't look the way you want them to, but as long as you continue to work through it and keep trying, then the final result will be worth it.